I believe we have a short video.
Lawful. I believe the statements made by Mr. Shakawi were and would be if they were stated again. We don't know why the prosecution chose not to continue with the charges, and perhaps it is to Mr. Fortin's point. I just want to dig in a bit about the concept of good faith, Mr. Ross. In Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Romans, there's other passages, there's clear hatred towards, for example, homosexuals. I don't understand how the concept of good faith could be invoked if someone were literally invoking a passage from, in this case, the Bible, but there are other religious texts that say the same thing, and somehow say that this is good faith. I mean, clearly there are situations in these texts where these statements are hateful. They should not be used to invoke or be a defense, and there should perhaps be discretion for prosecutors to press charges. I just want to understand what your notion of good faith is in this context where there are clearly passages in religious texts that are clearly hateful.
Thank you. I'm going to be calling up Dr. Mohler, Dr. Albert Mohler, in just a moment, but just to comment briefly upon that video, that is a man who was elected by Canadians to honor the Constitution and to govern. His name is Mark Miller. I don't think he's a fundamentally evil man. I don't think he is aware of what he is really saying, that the Word of God that has endured for thousands of years should be set aside in Canada to save the feelings of some people. It is an astonishing presumption that he is right and God is wrong. And we should never fall into that trap. Dr. Mohler. Dr. Albert Mohler Jr. is president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, which is the flagship school of the Southern Baptist Convention. He is a theologian and an ordained minister, having served as pastor and staff minister of several Southern Baptist churches. He came to the presidency of Southern Seminary from services, and here I can really relate to Dr. Mohler. He has been an editor, a journalist. He is editor of the Christian Index, the oldest of the state papers serving the Southern Baptist Convention. He has contributed to more than 100 other published works, and in addition to his duties as president of the seminary, Dr. Mohler hosts 2 podcasts: The Briefing, a daily analysis of news and events from a Christian worldview, and Thinking in Public. He also serves as the editor of World Opinions, writing regular commentary on moral, cultural, and theological issues. A native of Lakeland in Florida, Dr. Mohler holds a Master of Divinity degree, a PhD in Systematic and Historical Theology from Southern Seminary. He is married, two children, and he brings a special message for summit attendees from the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. Dr. Mohler. Seeing no Dr. Mohler, I believe we have a video, do we not? Meanwhile, Judy, would you mind seeing where JoJo is and where our guest might be? Thank you. So.
I'm Albert Mohler, and it is my great privilege to address you. I greet you in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Brothers and sisters there in Canada, I have to start out with a sense of indebtedness. My dear, sweet mother-in-law, constant encourager in my life, was from Canada and proudly raised on a farm just outside Sarnia there in Ontario. And I have a special regard and respect for Canada. And of course, we have such a close camaraderie. We're pleased here at Southern Seminary to have so many students from Canada and so many influences, and that includes professors from Canada as well. So I do greet you in the bonds of Christian affection. I also do so in the sense of alarm about some of the challenges that we face. And I appreciate very much the fact that you're gathering is directed towards some of these alarms and some of the challenges that Christians face. I want to put it in a larger context. I want us to think about the fact that virtually none of the challenges we will discuss has come out of a vacuum, and none could happen so long as the general frame of the civilization was understood to be that of Christianity. And I think we do need to recognize that on both sides of the border in the United States and in Canada, the Christian influence was essential to the beginning of the entire civilizational project. And I was just recently reminded of this, even if you go back to, say, the period right after World War II, in both the United States and Canada, church-going rates, public references to Christianity, acknowledgments of Christian morality and the authority of the Christian church, they were very clear. And so what has happened in human history has come with a social acceleration virtually unprecedented. And so we notice, and we have to call it something, and so sociologists have been calling this the process of secularization. And secularization, different theories offer slightly different arguments about how it came about, but I want to point to what comes at the end. And that is the fact that as Christians, we understand that we could call it something like a steady state theory of religious commitment. That steady state theory tells us, as I think is revealed in the Old Testament in terms of the one true and living God versus all the various idolatries of the nation surrounding Israel. And you see it in the New Testament. Paul at Mars Hill, I just had the privilege of preaching there myself. And again, Paul doesn't say, I understand you're not religious. No, he sees they're very religious. The religion aspect is a steady state. And so you say, well, even in a secularized society, how does that work? Well, it works because the energies are still invested in something that has nothing less than a religious impulse. And frankly, the focus of authority, the understanding of the source of authority, also comes with what can only be described as theological force. But right now what we see is that in the aftermath of this process of secularization, driven by an ideology of secularism, what we see is that the religion of so many, again on both sides of our border, is actually now personal autonomy. The entire religious system revolves around the self. And this is driven specifically by ideologies of the self and ideologies of personal liberation and personal autonomy. And those ideologies were, first of all, addressed to an enemy. And I think that's very clarifying for us. Those who sought to bring this revolution about understood that there was one central obstacle in their way, and that obstacle was Christianity. Now, it has to be tempered by the statement, and President Dwight Eisenhower here in the United States, a very steady president and unreliable theologian, but nonetheless, he made the statement in a time when he was affirming that the foundation of the entire project of the United States of America, he would describe as Judeo-Christian, meaning, I think in the best sense, it's a continuity, Old Testament, New Testament, and the civilizational principles that come from the Old Testament and the New Testament. It was a political statement, but it was also basically uncontested statement. It was non-controversial, and basically the same thing was also true there in Canada. Things began to change, and so in my steady state theory, what I'm telling you is that those who are the advocates of personal autonomy and unfettered individual self-expression, and the use of the state in basically a way to establish this idolatrous notion of personal autonomy with all the ideologies that go with it as the new state religion, I think we have to understand that just a matter of a couple of generations ago, you had to have keen insight to see this coming. I think most of us would now say it came much faster than we could have expected, and it has come unevenly. So let me just speak as an American. It's uneven in the United States of America. And so when you think about the map of the U.S., I often point to the fact that this particular, new paganism is far more explicit and far more established when you go to the two coasts, particularly the American Northeast and the West Coast. And it's also centered around college campuses, university influence, where you see political influence. By no surprise, even in the states, the city, which is the capital city within the states, is often more liberal, more socially progressive, indeed more secular, you could say, than the surrounding countryside. And I know much the same is true there in Canada. There's a geographic difference in terms of the distribution of worldview and the impact of how this ideology of personal autonomy and individual expressivism has really worked its way out. But we are facing some very real crises because the law is going to be religious whether it intends to be or not. The law is going to be based upon some presupposition, some basic sense of commitment to what it means to be human, what rights and what dignities fall to the human being, what should the society respect. And so ultimate authority is still going to be claimed, and some kind of ultimate sanction and power is still going to be exercised. I want to talk about several fronts. And I think the most important front we need to look at right away, and just looking sequentially at how this has unfolded, just consider the very meaning of human life. If you shift from a meaning of human life, which is based in historic Christianity and what is rightly referred to as the Christian worldview, the Christian world and truth understanding, if you take human dignity out of that, then you have redefined what it means to be human. And again, all being human means, in terms of certain sectors in our society now, is this expression of personal autonomy. You know, one of the things that gets very interesting in that, by the way, is that if personal autonomy is the only criterion, it begins with human beings made in the image of God, thus the imago Dei, and all that flows from that. But if you really begin with the idea of human personhood as grounded in some kind of capacity which is necessary for the exercise of autonomy, then how do you say that a human has a certain kind of status or dignity that, say, some other very intelligent animals do not have? This is how the animal rights movement has gained so much. If you deny the civilizational commitment to human dignity based in the imago Dei, then you have to have something else as a secular substitute. And one of the lessons we've learned is that no secular substitute will suffice. No surprise there to Christians. But this affects, of course, how you look at the meaning of the human person and then everything that comes from it. And of course, you could not have elective abortion the way that it is now routinely practiced and now made a fact of law. You cannot have abortion without the denial of the imago Dei. And furthermore, you can't have abortion and the destruction of unborn life the way it's taking place right now. And by the way, some of you know that Lord Falconer in the United Kingdom not too long ago actually made the argument in favor of assisted suicide, very liberal assisted suicide, so-called medical assistance in dying that is currently pending in Parliament there in the UK. You may have noticed that he said it should be available even to pregnant women, even in the advanced stages of pregnancy, when I think any sane person, even without any kind of access to special revelation, understands that at that point, you're talking about the woman demanding assisted suicide to kill herself and the child within her. The absolute disregard for all of this just is it's inevitable. This is what happens in the civilizational slide once you deny the human beings are made in the image of God. And of course, in a secular frame, you've got no image of God because you've erased God from the entire picture. But again, what is you're left with then is an idolatrous, nearly incalculable notion of human autonomy. And this is where we get to the marriage issue, the LGBTQ issues, very much the same. And so the entire logic gets turned upside down. And you look at every single civilization that has survived. It has found its way. Well, let me give you a good source here. Someone I found interesting on this for a very long time is a man named Pitirim Sorokin. He was a sociologist. He taught at Harvard University. He was actually the founder of the Department of Sociology at Harvard University. And he was someone who had witnessed so much of the turmoil and tumult of the 20th century. I think twice he had been under a death sentence by the Bolsheviks, later the Soviets, but he escaped and came to the United States. And you can't imagine someone like Pitarim Sorokin teaching on the faculty of Harvard University now, but he did then. And he made several observations, and he did so, at least in his understanding, simply by observing societies. And he said that the number one task of every single society is to reproduce itself through the birth of children. Okay, that should seem to be obvious. Again, Genesis 1. But you'll notice that it's not evidently obvious. And again, we as Christians understand Romans 1. They suppress the truth in unrighteousness. It's not that they don't know, it's that they will not see. But that's the point. They won't see. And so as you have this secularization of the society and this slide into a very different religious authority, the current religious authority of personal autonomy has reached the point where, again, you have the absolute rejection of the Imago Dei. And with that, you have the absolute exercise of personal autonomy, which, by the way, can only be, if absolute, well, absolute. It's a categorical. And so we just need to also pull the honesty card here and remind people that when they say absolute, they really don't yet mean absolute autonomy. There are still rules. They're just now a different set of rules. And the law, of course, if you follow this agenda of unfettered personal autonomy, which comes down also to sexual liberation, which also means, acclaimed liberation from biology, then you have to recognize same-sex couples, because you have to recognize persons who are same-sex attracted. You have to recognize that this is the exercise of their own identity as they claim it and of their personal autonomy. And then marriage has to be redefined. And this is one of the central issues, by the way, on the religious liberty front. It is the right of Christian churches to be Christian and faithful when it comes to matters, obviously, of sexual ethics and the rightful expressions of sex and the definition of marriage and the recognition of who is not married. And, even when you have, very robust constitutional protections of religious liberty, as in the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, I mean, the fact is we know there are those who definitely want to redefine that in such a way that Christians must, even Christian institutions must, Christian congregations must recognize the redefinition of marriage, must recognize the claims of the sexual revolutionaries, must recognize the claims of the LGBTQ movement. And of course, when it comes to T, you are talking about personal autonomy trumping even biology and denying even biology. Just in recent days, Ross Douthat of the New York Times interviewed Chase Strangio, who is one of the lawyers with the American Civil Liberties Union. And this attracted a lot of attention because this is the lawyer who is himself transgender in terms of his identity, who's made arguments before the United States Supreme Court, especially on behalf of the transgender movement. And Chase Strangio made the statement when Ross Douthat pressed him, when he basically said, well, a man is whoever thinks he's a man, and a woman is whoever thinks she's a woman. And of course, even the use of the pronouns here, you kind of fall into a trap because we believe a man can only be a man and a woman can only be a woman. But you'll notice how this personal autonomy issue, now it becomes the idol that trumps everything else. And that means, by the way, that even the definition of sex, because that was the distinction. Is that just gender identity? No, because that's not going far enough. If you're going to recognize personal autonomy, you have to redefine not only gender identity, try explaining that to the Apostle Paul, you have to redefine sex as well, biology. And that's where we are. And it presents enormous challenges to religious liberty, to Christian faithfulness. And of course, now we're looking also at the challenge of medical assistance in dying. And once again, you think, okay, just years ago, just a few decades ago, we could see this coming, but it seemed like it would take longer. And frankly, Christians had reason to be encouraged in at least some English-speaking societies where there appeared to be, at least in the period of, say, the 70s and the 80s, some reticence to move in this direction. Well, let's just face it, the reticence is gone. And I think some of the scariest developments right now are those in the United Kingdom and Canada. And in the United Kingdom, of course, as I speak, it's still pending. And the final form of the legislation is not clear. But what does seem very clear to me is that the secularization of the UK is to the point where it is only a question of time and the final form of the legislation. I mentioned Lord Falconer. It's astounding to see how many people have caved on this issue. And by the way, on these issues, there really is very little conservative presence in the UK. Even the Conservative Party, the Tories, under the direction of leaders such as former Prime Minister David Cameron, they've gone fully on board in terms of the personal autonomy agenda, even the redefinition of marriage, and to a considerable degree, even medical assistance in dying. And of course, one of the sad things for us as Christians to recognize is that the politicians who want to move in this direction obviously have enablers who have theological titles and an ecclesial authority. And we see this, on both sides of the Atlantic. As an American, I think I have been most surprised by the velocity of the unfolding events in Canada. And it's just a bracing reminder to us all of how the logic of the culture of death gains velocity even as it gains ground. And so in Canada, what we see, especially with the court's recent action and with the threatened, at least, expansion of the categories of those who could demand medical assistance in dying, even to children and to persons who have no terminal diagnosis. You get on the list, you know it better than I do. This is what happens. If personal autonomy is going to be worshiped, well, brothers and sisters, it's going to be worshiped. And if it's going to be worshiped, then it is going to come with its own authority. And that authority is inevitably going to be directed against those who will not go with the revolution, those who will not go with the redefinition. And thus, biblical Christians, gospel Christians, now find ourselves in a unique predicament wherever we are in the postmodern West. We understand that in some cases, what has shifted is from some explicit, conscious understanding of continuity with the worldview of Christianity to something that is avowedly secular, but at this point still somewhat tolerant. And then you also have those that have shifted to a situation which honestly is threatening to become absolutely intolerant. And you see this, by the way, not just with the issues I mentioned, you see it with hate crimes legislation, and you understand how all this comes. And so let me just state what should be, I think, pastorally obvious to us. Let's say that you have someone who claims transgender identity. Okay. So if the society makes the judgment that that is a rightful expression of personal autonomy and self-knowledge, so much so that again, triumphs even over biology, then society is going to have to take a side in whether or not you could, for instance, preach an expository sermon on Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, much less the related biblical passages and the comprehensive truth that is revealed in the Holy Scriptures. And so we understand that conflict is inevitable, and it is because society is by definition not only a set of commitments, but a process of coercion. It's not only a set of commitments, but a process of coercion. And I think everywhere in the modern world, it was a bit slower to become so apparent in the Anglosphere, in the English-speaking world. But now, very much in our world, we see this collision coming. It's not just the commitments that are increasingly being made, some by courts, some by judicial action, others by allied forces in society, and the commitments are now being translated into coercion. And on both sides of our border, I think we need to recognize that there are allied groups, there are associated groups, what the sociologist Peter Berger used to call mediating institutions that have enormous authority. And one of those are the professional associations. You just look at that entire arena. And so you've got medical associations and associations of pediatricians, and you just go down the list. And they have enormous authority. And the religious liberty front, we need to recognize, now has to include actions which may be taken and in some cases are being taken. I think of, for instance, the accreditation process for law schools there in Canada, which years ago was really coercive on all these issues. There are forces in the United States that would do exactly the same thing, or are just waiting until they can seize the opportunity. And so you have the American Bar Association. And it is understood to have the authority to establish the ethics for the legal profession. In virtually every jurisdiction now, the ABA is the authority that is cited. It's not by government. It's simply by social process. It is now the credentializing entity. And so we look at that and we recognize, with the flip of a switch of sorts, then Christians in the law can find themselves in a very precarious situation. This is already clear, I think, for all of us to see in terms of the practice of medicine. And you have the professional associations. Now in the United States, you have the creation of now an alternative group of pediatricians, an alternative group or different groups when it comes to different medical specializations. But the war is on, the battle is on. And the fact is that the mainstream bodies have been so co-opted by DEI, other ideologies, basically, again, the idolatry of personal autonomy, that they're now willing to use coercion against anyone who stands in their way. And eventually, you can see where this long march inevitably will lead. This does put Christians in a very precarious situation, but it also reminds us that there is no power in Christianity that is ultimately afraid of a social process and that will bend the knee to Caesar. And so even as Christianity, when it was very much at the center of the society, was given all the status that came with being at the center of society, we shouldn't be surprised that when society moves in a very different direction, which is a change in religious affections, I'll cite Jonathan Edwards, it is the religious affections changing from Christianity. Much of it was cultural Christianity. Yes, but the point is the authority structure came from Christianity. Now it comes from the idolatry of personal autonomy. It's going to put Christians in every context, in every profession, in every kind of institution, in a very new position. We're having to fight for our civil liberties. We're having to fight for our religious liberty, against hate speech, against the declaration that public prayers can now be a form of hate speech, censured, where the reading of Scripture, just think about some of the developments in the Scandinavian countries. Don't think it can't happen here. The activists want it to be as accelerated here as we see elsewhere on the planet. And so we need to take advantage, honestly, of every tool at our disposal, and that includes, well, we need the best attorneys. We need the best legal theorists. We need the best theologians. We need the best churchmen. We need the best we can bring to this equation, because it's going to require the defense of Christian liberty, yes, of religious liberty, in a context that's increasingly hostile because the religion of personal autonomy claims not to be a religion. And among the things that have now to conform to the new reality are Christianity, Orthodox Judaism, etc. This is why we find ourselves in a similar predicament with some people that we didn't see the commonality with before. The commonality is not theological. False ecumenism is the last thing we need right now. But it is a common predicament. And if nothing else, theism itself is now seen as the great enemy of the idol of personal autonomy. I want to tell you that you are in a predicament. You know that. And you're meeting to consider what that predicament is going to require of you. I think, number one, that is a great place to start. But it has to summon the deepest level of Christian conviction. The same level of Christian conviction that allowed Christians in the first century, in the second century, in the third century, even to stand over against Rome. We understand our responsibility. It's a gospel responsibility. And that comes down to witness. And we understand that word witness sometimes is translated into the word that we cite so often as martyrs. And I think we just need to recognize that's exactly, in terms of the historic reference, what should be humbling to us. We have not yet been tested unto death. And I think, by the way, that it's unlikely that the powers that are now behind the idolatry of personal autonomy, I doubt that's exactly where they want to go. My guess is what they want to do is to just marginalize any community of conviction, make it legally always on the defensive, socially always on the defensive, and then continue to press their agenda. What they aren't threatened by is Christianity that comes with absolutely no public consequence. And that's the one thing we have to understand that doesn't exist. There is no orthodox biblical Christianity without public consequences. You know, for instance, the early church surely understood that. Both sides in the Reformation understood that. Christianity is going to come with public consequences, and you know, it even comes down to whether those are Protestant or Catholic consequences. We may find ourselves in a similar predicament, but the reality is that we understand there is no such thing as a merely privatized Christianity. The apostles weren't in trouble for private conviction. They were in trouble for public proclamation. I just want to offer encouragement to you from a Christian brother here. And I'm so thankful that you're having this meeting. I'm thankful you're holding this conference. I would hope to encourage you by, on the one hand, offering a sober assessment of what is really at stake and the challenge we really face. And on the other hand, understanding that God is sovereign. Christ is Lord of the church. And if we are called to this, then Christ will show the power of the gospel in this. And he will be glorified in this. No one should ever say that Christianity doesn't come without public consequence, nor does it come without personal cost, congregational cost, institutional cost, professional cost. We resist this, we fight against it. It's not wrong to fight for religious liberty because ultimately we fight for our own liberty as well as the liberties of others. That goes back to the Imago Dei. But it is right also to understand that there may well be limits to that and consequences to that. And it's going to require a whole new faithfulness of Christians. And that means not only individually, but as congregations and even as denominations. It's going to require a level of courage that hasn't been required of us before. So from one Christian heart to another, I simply want to say, let us take heart and seize fast to the gospel. Stand upon the authority of God's word. Understand that we do have those who wish to silence us. And the one thing we can insist upon, whatever the cost, is that we will not be silent. God bless you all.
Unfortunately, he's right. Well, things are moving exactly in that direction, and I would refer you back to the metaphor of the snapshot in time, which is where we are now, where we can do pretty much, we can be faithful in public. And I just hate to think what the coming years are going to require of us, those of us who wish to be faithful. So I wish Dr. Mohler, by the way, I got this completely wrong. I thought he was going to be here in person, and I was busy working up this enthusiastic introduction. Here he is on the screen, and you know, if you want to know what an idiot looks like, well, just look here. Anyway, we are going to take a break. We are actually on time, which is, you know, this is a Christian community, and this is a miracle that we are on time. And I would invite you to take a break for, just go out there for 10 minutes, visit the prayer room, you know, drop off your questions for the forthcoming discussion, and we'll see you again at 4:06 when we will have Stockwell Day, not in person, but joining us on screen live. Okay? So, take 10.